Hey there, everyone. Welcome to A Slice of Life with Kellie and Jon. And today we have a fascinating guest, Dick Rosemont, who is going to talk to us about his history in music. He's been a musician and in bands and interested in music his whole life. And now what he does is he might have the world's largest record collection. I don't mean to exaggerate or anything, but he has a huge record collection and a business where he sells records, and he also has a website where he provides information about the original recordings. Correct? Did I get it right, Dick? Is that what you
Well, we separate the two. One is
Okay.
the business and one is the research about
Okay.
the first recording of a popular or hit song.
And what would make you want to do that? What would make you want to research original music?
Well, I was prompted probably about 40 years ago when I was started noticing early recordings or pre-hit recordings of a given song. I thought, well, this would be fun to put together on a mixtape. And so I would do that. And then people would, oh, can you make a copy of that for me? And then I started, it snowballed like so many
Mhm.
projects in life. And then I realized, well, this is a pre-hit version, but it's not actually the first recording. I would learn more and more. And it just snowballed from there. So, and it's a never ending project.
So can you give me an example of where do you find these recordings? Like where would you find
Wherever I can. Well, I will say that the CD era, which began in the early 1980s, helped because there were liner notes with CDs that had more information than typically you would find on an album cover. So that helped. And having been in a business of buying and selling records, which I've been doing for almost 49 years, that just lets you know that I'm at least 49 years old.
them?
It allowed me to get in touch with people who had access to record company archives to get me recording dates. Because I might come down to, well, these two recordings were done before the hit version we know, but they both came out at the same time. But which one was recorded first? And I go by recording date because that's absolute. Issue date is not related to recording date. So it just snowballed. And having a record store, I was in East Lansing, Michigan at the time, where Michigan State is. And that gave me some credibility in contacting record companies and getting access to information. And that's all changed through the years with the consolidation of the music business and people losing their jobs, dying, or having 5 jobs now because they've consolidated with other companies and they don't want to mess with people like me. So I get information wherever I can. I know people around the country and around the world. And before I had the website, which we can mention at some point for the originals aspect of this, I had articles published in a record collecting publication, and that spurred a lot of mail. And this is back in the email days, so I was able to correspond and make connections with people who would help me learn even more. You never. I know enough to know I don't know it all.
Well, okay, so as you're talking, I'm thinking, what is the earliest recording you have?
Well, it's not
You know?
necessarily the age, but let's say, I don't know, pick a hit song, and if somebody recorded it prior to the hit and it wasn't well known, then that would qualify. So
And would it be the original art? Would it be the artist that made it famous, or it would be someone else?
no, this is typically the artist it wasn't a known version. And we know it from somebody. Do you know the song Wild Thing by the
Okay.
Trogs? All right. Do you know that song, Kelly?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, the Trogs were not the first to record that song,
Okay.
but the first recording of it's pretty obscure because it was not popular. It was not a hit. So people don't know of it. And so that's what I tracked down, that kind of information. And on my website, I try to have a picture of every first release or first recording of a song, be it an album, a 45, a CD, a 78, a cylinder. Do you know what cylinders were?
Yeah, the old the old Thomas Edison cylinders. It would go on this tube that the needle stayed still and the tube went around. The original recordings, yeah.
Right. So the first recording of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" was done in, I believe, 1908, and I have a picture of the cylinder that has the title on the rim of the edge of it. So,
well, I'll give you a good example of this. Obviously, having known Dick and being over his house one day, I thought I had, oh, no problem. Dick's never gonna have this. And actually, we're more familiar with a version, and I wanted the version recorded by the guy who made the song, who wrote the song, but recorded his version of it about 10 years after the original version that had the hit record. Now, the song I'm talking about was by Gary Lewis and the Playboys, called "This Diamond Ring." Do you remember it?
Yeah.
Okay. So we all know "This Diamond Ring" by Gary Lewis and the Playboys. But Al Cooper wrote the song, and I wanted a copy of that, and I knew that Al had recorded it off of a very obscure album. So I go over to Dick's house, and I'm like, "Dick, I'd like if you can, cut me a copy of this." And of course, he takes the album out, and he has it, the Al Cooper album. And then he says, "Would you like the original recording of it?" I says, "Well, I have the Gary Lewis and the Playboy recording." He said, "No, years earlier, somebody else did it." Right, Dick? I mean, I don't.
it wasn't that much earlier, but it was pre Gary Lewis.
Yeah. Very great
also,
stuff like that. And like he said, he has his record collection includes 78s, which certainly came along before 45s and 33s, and they were very thick and they were so easy to break.
Yeah, you don't want to look at it too long; it might crack.
Do you have them like is it temperature? Are they temperature sensitive? Like, do you have to be careful how you store all your records?
Well, I mean, they're inside,
Yeah.
they're not out in the sunshine, or they're not in the shed in the freezing,
Right.
I don't
So
have
just
to
a
worry
medium,
about it too much, but
regular temperature.
beyond just a basic thing, you don't have to get out the white gloves or anything, but you just, 78 as John says, they are quite brittle. They're very heavy. Most of them are. So, plus 78s are interesting because very few people have a way to play a 78. Turntables starting in the early 70s eliminated the 78 speed because the records weren't part of the market at that point. So you need a turntable that has a 78 speed in addition to, say, 33 and 45, but you also need a different needle than you would use for a 33 or 45. You can't play a 78 with that kind of needle. The groove is much wider on a 78, and the velocity of 78 RPM rotation, that'll just tear off a standard 45 or album needle. So it helps to have the equipment to play a 78.
So do people like order your records online, or do they just come into where you are? You have a store in New Mexico, right?
I do
Santa
have a
Fe,
shop.
New Mexico.
I do have a shop in Santa Fe, yes. I got involved in having a record store, as I think I mentioned, in East Lansing, Michigan, and I wasn't looking for a business. I was a music person, and I thought, hey, this way people will bring me their records if you have a used record store, So, unfortunately, I had enough of a collection that I wasn't keeping all the store's inventory. You want to get it out to the public, to your customers. You want to make an impression on people. And I had a partner, and we were pretty similar in that sense. He had a reasonable collection, and so we weren't just keeping everything that came in the store. But I was spoiled for decades having a partner, an equal partner that you could trust. So, and now I'm moved to Santa Fe about 13 years ago, and I wasn't sure what I would be doing, but I realized I couldn't stop dealing in records. And a big part of it for me, of course, the music is of interest, but I like the interaction with people. That's a big part of it. It's not just bottom line. And people ask me if I do online sales. I go, well, that's a business. There's no fun in that. You don't get to talk to people. You don't get to share something. You don't get to learn something. So I don't say I never do anything online, but it's a very small percentage of what I do. And I want to reward the people who take the trouble to come to find me and come to my store. And another thing that I've learned through the years is that if you have a good relationship with your customers, it may be their turn to sell to you someday. Yeah. When things change or, whatever situation occurs. So if you've got a good relationship, they may become your supplier at some point.
When they want to give up their record collection.
Yeah, or they need money or they're downsized, whatever situation occurs. Yeah. You've got all kinds of situations.
Are there any records that are like really valuable, like that people would pay a lot of money for?
Absolutely. The ones that, well, it's hard to talk about, but in general, the things that command the biggest premiums are things you've never heard of because they didn't sell much. They're obscure to most people, but not to everyone. There are some known artists.
I know high up on the list is the Beatle Butcher Block cover.
Right. That's a clear-cut premium item, but it's not rare. They printed over 900,000 of those.
I thought only 100,000. I'll take
900,000. Well, you consider this is an album that was released in 1966, the Beatles Yesterday and Today album, and the Beatles were selling millions of records. So in anticipation of the sales of this album, they printed over 900,000 slicks, covers. But the original cover was deemed not appropriate for 1966. The Beatles are in butcher smocks and they've got doll parts and meat slabs in them. And the photographer's MO for that image wasn't an album cover. He was picturing a whole series of small, maybe postage size images of the Beatles and some kind of artistic statement. And then some wise person at Capitol Records in this country decided it was worthy of being in an album cover. And that person's never been ID'd that I'm aware of, So just a handful of days after it was released, it got so much backlash that Capitol had to backtrack. And rather than throw out all the existing records covers, they pasted the replacement image on top of that. So again, it's not rare, but it's collectible. And this could be a whole topic unto itself. So I don't want to get too deep into this, but you've got ones that never had the replacement cover on it. That's referred to as first state. One with the replacement image on it is second state. And some of those replacement covers are peelable, depending on which glue was used at which Capitol factory. They're not all peelable. I have peeled a number of them through the years, but I've also encountered some that are not peelable. So you don't want to butcher the butcher cover. And so third state would be one that has that replacement image peeled from it and ideally in good condition. Then you've got the difference between mono and stereo. Stereo albums were printed along with mono albums between 1958 and 1968. And stereo albums cost $1 more. And that was pretty significant, particularly in the mid 60s. And most kids who were buying Beatles albums didn't buy stereo pressings. It cost $1 more. And you weren't supposed to play a stereo pressing unless you had a stereo needle on your record player. And most kids didn't own a stereo per se. They owned a record player. So it's estimated that 10 to 15% of those 900,000 were stereo and 85% of them were mono. So a stereo butcher cover is much less common than a mono. I'm giving you too much detail here, but that's the overview.
One of the other things that I remember going back to the 50s and 60s and certainly into the 70s, but they were very popular in the 50s and 60s, were records that were made with red vinyl or yellow vinyl. They were multicolored vinyl. Are any of those any more valuable than the original, or one that was just on regular black vinyl?
It can be. It depends on the artist, if it's a collectible artist. And one of the factors involved in these non-black records is that my understanding is one of the elements that makes records black was a lubricant. And if you don't have black in there, it may not last as long. So,
Right.
so that's applied to picture discs that were popular in the 70s. And picture discs were albums, records that were clear but had an image in it. They
Right.
didn't print the picture in the groove itself, but it was underneath the clear pressing of the record. And on a lot of those, there was a disclaimer on the back that would say, sound may not be equal to conventional issue.
There you go.
Hmm.
There you
So, but those are fun. It depends on the artist. For a while there, Dave Mason, who some people know and some people probably don't know, he was originally a member of the band Traffic with Steve Winwood. He left shortly after that, and he had a solo career, more successful as a writer, particularly if you're familiar with the song Only You Know What I Know. Anyway, his first solo album, the first pressing of it was on kind of multicolor vinyl. And that used to bring a premium. But fast forward to now, where fewer people know about Dave Mason or care about Dave Mason. So it's not very easy to sell this limited pressing on multicolor vinyl than it was.
Well, how about Elvis records on Sun? Those are fairly rare. Well, not rare.
Well, they're not super rare. You can find them, but they're so collectible because this is before Elvis Presley was signed to RCA Records. And he put out 5 records on Sun label, which was a local Memphis label, and it didn't have national distribution. So the owner of Sun, Sam Phillips, wasn't able to capitalize on Elvis Presley's growing popularity. And that's when he sold his contract, and RCA paid a whopping $25,000 for it in 1955 or 56. And so those early records on Sun are not that common. They're not super rare. The 45s, they came out both on 45 and 78. And condition is a big factor. Some of them were counterfeited, so you need to know how to ID legitimate copies.
Counterfeiting the label?
Pardon me?
Counterfeiting the Sun label on the
Oh,
record?
yeah. Well, counterfeiting the record.
Yeah, well, I can understand how people could press their own records at some point, but then they'd also have to counterfeit that label.
Absolutely. But one of the details involved with records, 45s, 78s, LPs, is you've got information in the runoff groove. And so you can tell the legitimacy of most records based on what information should be in the runoff groove. Is it hand scribed? Is it machine stamped? What does it say? What does it not say? There's details. So, but the Sun records from Elvis Presley definitely bring a premium. And that's notable because Elvis Presley records in general at this point are not an easy sell. Who buys them? 20-year-olds don't care about owning Elvis Presley records. And the people who grew up with him are getting up in years and they're ready to divest. And they're not necessarily looking to add to their collection. But the Sun records from Elvis are worthy enough that there's still a market for them.
So what are the most valuable records? Like
well,
in the collector world?
Well, it's hard to give you a list out of every record ever made, and it changes over time.
Okay.
Record collecting and collectible records, the market for records is kind of a moving target, particularly as I mentioned, as the population ages. And this applies not just to records, it applies to everything. Cars, antiques, it's always shifting as the supply and demand moves.
Yeah.
So, as some people get older, they want to reclaim their youth, whether it's cars or dolls or whatever. But then as those people move on, then that market changes. So
Well,
it's really hard to come up with a list.
I sort of see, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the current generation, not ours, but the current generation,
Current younger generation.
maybe yes, the current, even the one, and their parents. Okay, let's just say that they don't seem to be the collecting type anymore. You know, I don't know, and if they are, I don't know what it is that they're collecting.
I can testify to that fact. I have friends who have collections of records or whatever, and if they have kids, more often than not, the kids say, "Don't leave me with this stuff. I'm not interested in it, and I don't want to have to deal with it." They're
And
not interested in accumulating things the way some. I'm not saying no one is. Of course, if no one cared about records, I wouldn't have a business.
Right.
So, but they're not. It's really hard to say because this is a complex market. Records is because music's available in so many avenues, and records are for people who want to own the artifact, the physical, tangible goods, put it in their hands. And sure, you can get the music lots of ways, but not everybody can have a record. And it's the thrill of the hunt. People collect thimbles, people collect motorcycles, and it's fun to go around and shop for these things and chat with people who have similar interests. It's kind of it's part of the thrill of the hunt, as
It's
I
like
say.
baseball cards, kind of.
Exactly.
Like
Well, and the other thing I point out is that people collect stamps. They never put them on an envelope. People collect coins and they never spend them. You can collect records, you can play them, you can not play them. There's people who collect sealed copies of albums. They don't care about playing them or not. It's the thrill of the hunt, and whatever pride they get from having a collection of sealed albums.
Yeah.
I can't explain everybody's interest.
Yeah. Well, Gen Z, I think it's Gen Z you're talking about, Jon. I think they're not as superficial. They're not as materialistic, let's say, materialistic. They're more, free and don't want to accumulate a lot of stuff, and just happy. They're more about the experiences in life rather than things. That's what they say. That's what I read. So I don't know. But so we have your websites. We will put them on the video. Guyinthegroove.com is where people can look at your record store and see where they would buy records. And then originalsproject.us. I had to write that down. Is where people can find out information about original records.
The first recordings of popular and hit songs. Yes.
And so, tell us a little bit about that. The first recordings, even before the hit, right?
Well, that's generally the deal. And it's based on my perspective, and it's based on being in this country, because I get emails from people from around the world and they have a whole different view of it. Well, what do you mean? No, you need this, no, or that. And I said, well, it's based on my perspective in this country. So, that's okay. You can do your own if you want. And it's not like you're going to be tested on this. It's for fun.
So when they go on your website, what are they finding out? What kind of information is on there regarding these?
I have, the bulk of it is labeled the main song listing, and there's an alphabet. And you can click on a letter of the alphabet, and then there are songs listed by alphabetical order. And I try to have an image of every original release, whatever the format. And so that's a never ending quest too, because there's a few things that have eluded me. I don't have to own it. I just have to find someone who does. And even though the recording may be available, which I generally have, I can't always find a picture of the original issue of it. but most I do. So you'll see a picture of it, and it's a thumbnail, and you can click on it, and then you see a bigger image of it. And I list the song, and I list who recorded it first, when it was recorded, and how it was released, with the record company and issue number. And then I have who you might know the song from, which I label a remade. It's a column, remade by. And it can't be comprehensive because some songs have been recorded 1,000 times. But it would be the notable artists who have done this song, some that you would know and others you may not know. And I have some subsections on there too, like rewritten songs, where artists have taken either legitimately or not elements of a song and incorporated it into their own song. And then there's a bunch of sections on it. It's fun. It's all information. I don't have the recordings on there for a couple of reasons. It takes up a lot of space, and there may be, I don't want to get involved in legal issues.
Yeah.
So, and most of these songs with sites like YouTube, most of them people can track down, at least here, if they, and I'm always happy to share. People can write to me. I'm always happy to share recordings. I just don't have them en masse on my website.
What do you know about Taylor Swift redoing hers? Do you have anything related
Well,
to her?
it's her own song. She did the original and she re-recorded it so that she could own the master. That was the gist of that. So that doesn't really qualify because her first recording was known by people. And the fact that she re-recorded it, and sometimes artists record their own songs more than once. They may have a live album in which they do the song. There may be a compilation release come out and they don't have access to the first recording and they will re-record it. So that's a little bit different, but I understand the concept.
Yeah. Yeah, that was brilliant of her to do that.
Well, she has the means and the finances to do that. So good for her.
Yeah. Yep. Good.
Well, it was just bad business, the fact that she, most artists, and Jon can talk about this as well, until recently, people didn't think about owning their masters. There's a few exceptions where people actually did own their masters, but that was not normally the case. And people didn't realize the value of owning the publishing of a song, which is the copyright. They get credit for being the writer, but they don't, if someone else records it, they're not paying that writer to do it unless they own their own publishing. So it's a complex business. It's always changing. And you've heard maybe some stories about artists who have sold their publishing. Bob Dylan, it would be at the top of the list because he was paid a lot of money for his publishing because his talent will continue beyond his life. People will still be recording his songs, and then the publishers are making something from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Music's just such a big part of our lives. I mean, it just, evokes memories and emotions, and it's always in the background, even at the grocery store or at a party or a club or whatever, restaurants. So yeah, music is quite fascinating. I think all the different aspects of it, and such a big business. So
a major part of the cultural fabric.
Yeah. Yep. Sure does mean a lot to all of us. Yeah. So, well, thank you for sharing your story and telling us about your store and your records. And I learned things I didn't know about that I wouldn't have even known to ask. So, that's always interesting to know something, from the past that you wouldn't think of and that you wouldn't understand. So is there a museum for these old records or anything? Or
there's quite a few.
Okay.
There's audio archives, particularly for 78s and cylinders. These are usually associated with some educational facility, colleges and such, universities. There's a lot of them. There's one in New York, was called the Archive of Contemporary Music, but they've had to move, and I haven't gotten an update as to whether they can find a home that they can afford, because you don't necessarily make money storing an archive,
Right. And you have to pay the bills. So, yeah.
come to New Jersey, you must let me take you to Thomas Edison's laboratory, where I have been several times, so that you could see and hear the original cylinder of Mary Had a Little Lamb, the very first recording ever.
Wow.
He was doing that with foil, wasn't he? I think before cylinders actually got.
It's right before the plastic cylinders.
Yes.
Wow.
And my understanding is that Thomas Edison wasn't looking for a way to reproduce sound for commercial purposes. It was for dictation.
Yes, exactly what it was. That's what he wanted to do.
Having grown up in suburban Detroit, in Dearborn, Michigan, there's a Henry Ford Museum that has a lot of Edison stuff, because Ford and Edison were cronies back then, and they have a lot of Edison archive there as well. But he did his labs at Menlo Park.
Tell us the story before we get off, the quick story, and I'm certainly hoping that you know this story, of why after the first pressing of Surfing USA, did it just say Brian Wilson on it, but on the second pressing, it said Brian Wilson and Chuck Berry?
Because the melody and chord progression were taken from Sweet Little 16.
That's correct. That's right.
But at the same time, if you were here, I would play you the song that Chuck Berry lifted it from. It's called, and you know, when it comes to people pursuing legal action against another artist, it typically involves deep pockets. You know, there's no point in suing somebody who can't pay you anything. Right. And that's why people like George Harrison and John Lennon have been the target of copyright suits, because they're deep pockets. And, you know, Led Zeppelin, there's loads of Led Zeppelin songs that they've had to backtrack and give additional credit to, but that's another story.
Yeah.
There you go. So
Interesting.
You got it. You got it.
So you can, on my originals project site, you can see that Sweet Little 16 and Surfing USA would be in the rewritten songs category, where a song has been lifted from another song.
There you go. Well, thank you, Dick. It was wonderful having you on.
Well, thank you, Jon and Kellie. I can talk as long as you'd let me. So if I haven't scared you off to do this another time, consider it.
Oh, please. We'd like it. And, you know, if there's something, if just something comes up in your industry, in your world, let us know. And, you know,
we'll do a little short blurb about it, or we can do a whole show.
Sure. Well, as far as my retail record operation, I should, because you did give the website, but I'm always happy to advise people, assess and advise. And I've done it long distance. Technology makes it a lot easier. So if people have questions about records value, they're dealing with an estate, they don't know who to turn to.
Yeah.
I'm always happy to be involved. And as I say to people, after 48 years, I'm not here for the hit and run.
Okay.
Right. That's great. Thank you, Dick. It was wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Very interesting. Thank you. Bye-bye. And now let's finish with a disclaimer. All views expressed in this video belong to Kellie Nicholson, John D'Amore, and guests. These discussions do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever with which they have been affiliated now or will be in the future. The opinions expressed are solely theirs, and since they are critically thinking human beings, these views are subject to change, subject to revision, and subject to rethinking at any time. These conversations are not meant to be taken as advice and are only for the purpose of entertainment. All statements may be based on hearsay and not necessarily valid proof of any claims in this video. It is not our intention to teach or advise on any topic. Unless otherwise noted, all photos are public domain. Thanks for watching A Slice of Life with Kellie and Jon.